Hi everyone, it's Annie, and today we have my November wrap-up for 2020. Now, there were two readathons that I participated in this November, IndigAThon and Nonfiction November. Both were super fun, and I went a little overboard with how many books I read this month. I read 35. I don't know why I did this to myself because now I have to film me talking about all of them, but that's okay. This is gonna be fun. It's a long video, so grab your drinks and let's get right into these books. The first book I read this November was Mexican Gothic. Now, I had heard some really mixed reviews about this, but personally, I enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't amazing, or it wasn't 5 stars. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I really enjoyed it. I remember listening to it and not wanting to stop listening because I wanted to know what happens. I agree that the twist wasn't really a twist because it was so heavily foreshadowed that they basically spoon-fed it to you, but I liked it. The story is that this girl who's like a socialite from the big city goes to rural Mexico to help her cousin who is sick and whose husband is accused of poisoning her. So I really liked the vibe of this, definitely Gothic. I wish it had a little bit more of a Gothic horror vibe, but all in all, I liked it very much. The next book I read was my first for Nonfiction November, and it was the Watercolor Handbook. And my mom sent me this, and it was just a really nice read. I mean, it's a how-to guide for how to paint watercolors, which I like to do, but it has really amazing artwork, really amazing, and it was very informative, very interesting to read, so thank you, Mom. The next book I read was Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I loved this book so much. I'm so happy that it lived up to the hype that it has here on Booktube. I loved it from start to finish. It was just a masterpiece. It was so emotional and just, it really spoke to me. It was really moving. And Matt Haig is an incredibly talented author. Incredibly talented. Lovely writing style. Lovely story. And I really connected to the main character. All in all, just a masterful novel. Definitely one of my favorites for this year. The next book I read was Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the first book that I read for this IndigAthon, and I really enjoyed it. It's my first Stephen Graham Jones novel. It's actually a novella, it's quite short, and it follows this young boy who has lost his father, and his father's ghost, maybe, comes back, and it's a horror story. So it's actually quite scary, and you really get to know this little family, and you really connect to this boy and his story and his struggles with grief and figuring out where he is in this world, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you liked The Only Good Indians, which I have not read yet, but it's by the same author, so definitely check this out. The next book I read was for Nonfiction November, and it is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? And this is actually written by the YouTuber Ask a Mortician, who I am subscribed to and I love her videos. I recommend listening to this on audiobook because she narrates it and she does a really great job. This book is about Caitlin answering questions from children about death. I've seen some people who don't really like it because the questions are from children, so it's a bit juvenile, especially compared to Caitlin's other books, which I also recommend. But I thought it was a really nice book, and I think it's wonderful that Caitlin is so death positive and bringing that death positive mindset to children. I think it's super important, and I do recommend this book. The next book is a big one. It is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I know everyone and their brother read this probably this month, but I loved it. 5 stars for me before we get into anything else. It wasn't perfect, but I just loved it. I definitely think it is worth the hype. The story is beautiful. I loved Addie. My only complaint is that I wish we saw more of Addie's travels during her immortal life, because we only, well, not only, but a lot of these stories about her through the years are only her meeting these random people and kind of falling in love with them and spending the night with them and then having them forget her. That happens quite a lot, and it's always the same thing, which of course I'm pretty sure was V.E. Schwab's point, because Addie has to go through this and suffer through this because no one can remember her. But I would have appreciated that plus Addie's travels throughout the world, because we read a little bit about her travels through Europe, but she lives for over 300 years, so you would assume she has time to travel the whole world, and I would have liked a little bit more of that and a little bit less romance. But the main romance in the book is really cute. I really liked it. I liked the main boy character, and I thought it was really well done, so definitely recommend this. The next book is a sci-fi book. It's a novella called To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I am so glad I read this. It's another 5-star read. I read this because of Books with Emily Fox's raving reviews about it. I absolutely loved this. Oh my gosh. I loved the characters so much. It's a pretty character-driven novella, which I love. I'm a character-driven person. But oh man, I love it. I love it so much. This mystery involved, and this group of people, this found family on this spaceship traveling through deep space, exploring moons and new worlds, and I just love it so much. I love all the characters' relationships with each other, and you really get to know every single character. They're all really unique and fleshed out. Becky Chambers has a really, really creative mind. I can tell just from this really short book, and I'm definitely going to read more from her. The next book on this list is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. I loved this book. It's another 5-star read. It's definitely not what I would have usually gone for. It's about this woman in Kentucky, rural Appalachia, who has blue skin because of a genetic, I don't want to say defect, but like a genetic thing that runs through her family. Of course, because of this, this book takes place in the 30s, I believe, the 1930s. I hope I'm not wrong about that. But because of this, she faces a lot of prejudice, and it's just so emotional. I absolutely love the main character of this book. I fell in love with her. And this was tagged as romance on Goodreads, but that's why I was a bit about reading it, but the romance is such a small part of this book. Most of the book really, really focuses on the main character and her feelings and thoughts. And of course, it's a book about books. The main character is a packhorse librarian, which I knew nothing about, and it is such a cool concept. It's so cool to know that this actually happened in history, that these women went around delivering books to underprivileged families as a librarian, a traveling librarian, and it is so cool. And you get to see her interacting with these people in the mountains of Kentucky. I love this book. Really, I really do. I don't want to say if you only read one book out of this, read this, but I just love this book so much. Absolutely one of my favorites that I've read this month. This next book is also for IndigAthon, so I won't go too much into it because I went into the synopsis and a review of it in my IndigAthon tag video. And it is a poetry collection called This Accident of Being Lost, and I really, really liked this. It was very nice, very moving, and very, powerful. I think powerful is the right word for this. The author definitely knows her way with words. She's a great poet, so I recommend this book. The next book was also for IndigAthon, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought I was going to like it more than I did, but I still really liked it. I just felt like it was a bit off with the pacing. In the middle of the book, really not much happens. The beginning of the book and the end of the book are superb, really, really good. And I love the setting, pre-Columbian Americas, love it. Crow gods, ancient religions, love it. Also, some of the characters, there are, I guess, 4 main characters that this book follows, and I really only connected to 2 of them. I actually don't even remember the other 2's names, which is a problem because I just read this. Regardless of all those things, I do recommend this if you like fantasy. It's a really, really unique book, and I still want to read more of Rebecca Roanhorse's work. The next book was for Nonfiction November, and it is Midnight in Chernobyl. I really liked this book. I mean, I learned a ton about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster and the politics surrounding it, and how the Soviet Union viewed the world and how the world viewed them. It's a really, really important part of history and definitely a changing point in the world in recent modern history. So I really recommend this book if you want to learn more about it. The next book I read was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho, and this is a short novella. I was disappointed by this. Well, I guess it's kind of unfair because this month spoiled me a little bit. There were so many 4 and 5 stars books that I read, but this book still got 3 stars from me. Absolutely not a bad read. If you like the concept, I still definitely recommend you check it out. It's a wuxia-inspired fantasy, and I really loved the main character, who is a nun of this religious order, and she travels with a group of bandits around the country, and it's really, really interesting. However, I think the writing style for me personally wasn't what I was expecting or looking for, and I think it could have benefited from a little bit more editing. But all in all, I liked the story and I do recommend it. The next 3 books I have were all for IndigAthon, and the first one is Elazoe by Darcy Littlebadger. I liked this book. I really liked the asexual representation, of course, and I loved the main character, Elazoe. It's a really magical story. I gave it 3 stars for reasons that you can see in the video linked down below about IndigAthon. But all in all, I definitely recommend it if you're interested in a middle grade / YA indigenous magical story. The next one is Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq, about an Inuit girl growing up in Nunavut, Canada during the 1970s, and it's magical realism kind of written in a lyrical poetry style. It's a very strange book. There's a lot of content warnings, but it's very magical and very, very unique. And the audiobook is great because you can hear Tanya Tagaq's Inuit throat singing. So it's a really unique experience, and if you're interested, check it out. And the next one is The Marrow Thieves by Sherry DeMaline. I loved this book. Absolutely recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. It is a post-apocalyptic book about these indigenous people on the run from white people who are trying to capture them to steal their bone marrow, because everyone in the world except indigenous people have lost the ability to dream. And apparently their bone marrow helps everyone in some way to gain the ability to dream. I loved it. Loved the characters. The main character and all the people he meets on his travels are so well developed. Absolutely love it. Highly recommend. The next book I read was nonfiction called The Unidentified by Colin Dickey. I was a little bit disappointed by this book. Even though I absolutely love the subject matter, I love aliens, I love unexplained mysteries, I love cryptids like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, I think this book was a little bit disorganized. in its structure. Yeah, I think that's the main problem with it. I still liked it. I gave it 3 stars. So it had some really interesting stories that I had no idea about before I read it. So if you're like me and you like paranormal and unexplained mysteries, then check it out. The next book I read was also nonfiction, and it was The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. I loved this. 5 stars. I could not put this down. I was reading it every single chance I got. I didn't read the audiobook because I heard that the narrator did not do a great job, although I can't vouch for that personally. So I just read the ebook, and I loved it. I really loved following this story. It is so tragic. These girls used radium paint to paint watches to make them glow in the dark, but it was radioactive. And because they licked the brushes to make a fine point, their jaws literally started disintegrating. Ugh, it's so awful. Horrible. Very tragic, but I loved reading about their story. I really think everyone should read this book. The next book I read was Moon of the Crested Snow. I really liked this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's another post-apocalyptic indigenous story, and it's set in Canada, just like the Marrow Thieves. It is about a small reservation who have to deal with the aftermath of basically a societal collapse, and they have to learn how to survive and what their next steps are going to be. I loved the characters in this. All the characters, even very minor ones, felt real. They felt really fleshed out and 3-dimensional, and I especially loved the main character and his family. So if you'd like to hear more about it, again, check out my video on IndigAthon. Alright, now we get into the meat of Nonfiction November here. I read a lot of nonfiction books that have been on my list for a long time. The first one was The Stranger in the Woods. It's about a hermit who lived in the woods of Maine for, I believe, 27 years without ever speaking to anyone. And he was caught because he fed himself by stealing food from neighboring cabins. It's an amazing story. I really enjoyed reading it. I gave it 5 stars. It's just absolutely amazing. I had heard a little bit about this man before, but I never really knew about him and his story, so I really recommend reading this. The next book I read was The Nordic Theory of Everything. And I picked this up because I saw one of my coworkers reading this and I was interested in it. And it's basically a Finnish woman telling us how the Nordic nations are better than America in their social lives and, medical insurance, schools, social security, basically everything. I liked this book. However, I thought it was kind of depressing. Because I'm American, and I agree with everything she said. I really think American society needs a change, but I don't know, I thought the book was had a little bit of a depressing tone, and I wish that she had more of an optimistic tone, that yes, if the Nordic countries can do it, America can too. But it's a really informative read, and I do recommend it. The next book I read was Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I loved it. It's actually the first book I ever read by Virginia Woolf, and I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed it. I loved how it was basically her just talking about how much she hates men all day. I love it. It's just great. And I agree with all of her points. I mean, even today, they're still relevant, which is also depressing, but it's a great book. If you want to learn about women's history and women in creative fields, especially writing, of course, then definitely pick this one up. The next book I read was 84 Charing Cross Road. It's a collection of letters written by this woman in America to a small independent bookshop in the UK. And at first, it's just her requesting a book that's hard for her to find, but then she and this bookshop owner become friends, And it's just really, really heartwarming to see their letters through the years. And I really, really recommend this, especially if you like books about books. The next book I read was Columbine by Dave Cullen, about the tragedy of the Columbine high school shooting in America in the 1990s. And the author was actually one of the reporters, journalists there. I thought that this was a really, really comprehensive, unbiased, respectful writing and recounting of the Columbine tragedy. I am too young to remember when this happened, but it really has changed American society, and it's a very important point in history, and I really recommend this. It's very respectful to all the victims, and also respectful to how the murderers' families and parents dealt with the aftermath of this, which I really appreciated, so highly recommend this book. The next book I read was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, and I also picked this book up because I saw one of my coworkers reading it. It is a very short book about the author's experience in Auschwitz. It is extremely powerful, and he talks about how the people in this concentration camp either lived or died, and the people who lived were the people who still felt like their life had meaning and they had something to live for and hope for after the concentration camp. And it was so interesting to see a psychological point of view of this, especially from someone who was in a concentration camp. So I definitely recommend this book. And the next book I had been meaning to read for years and years. It is I Am Malala. It is just every bit as good as I thought it was going to be. I wish it hadn't taken me so long to read. I really loved it so much. Of course, it's a 5-star read. I learned so much about Malala and her life, and I just really, really respect her even more than I already did. She is such a strong person, absolutely amazing person, such a good, kind soul, and such a tragic life, and I just absolutely really respect her, and this book I think should be required reading for everyone. The next 2 books I read because I needed something a little bit lighter. All those nonfiction books I talked about had been really heavy, so I wanted something light and fluffy, and I got that with 2 books about Nordic concepts. One is The Little Book of Luca, and the other is Lagom. And I really enjoyed them. I had read The Little Book of Hygge by the same author, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super cute. The Little Book of Luca is just a little book on how to be happier, and I really liked the author's advice. I actually already do a lot of the things that he advised. I thought it was nice. If you want something fluffy and happy and short, I recommend this. And lagom is a Swedish word, whereas Luca is a Danish word. Probably not pronouncing that right, by the way. And I thought this book wasn't as good. It's not by the same author, but I thought it was nice. It was a little bit surface level, but of course that's what I was kind of looking for. It's very fluffy, just a nice little book. Alright guys, we're almost there. We're down to the last 5 books. The next 2 books were disappointments for me. I gave them both 2 stars. The first one was the Tao of Poo, and I was really interested in it because I wanted to learn more about Taoism in an accessible way, and unfortunately this book just didn't really work for me. I didn't like the style that it was written in. It didn't really make understanding Taoism any easier. I actually thought that the portions of the book where Winnie the Pooh characters weren't involved were the most interesting. I'm still interested in learning about Taoism, but I think I'm going to pick up a book that's a little bit more, I don't want to say serious, but a little bit more in-depth about Taoist principles. And the other book that I gave 2 stars was Ikigai, How to Find Your Purpose in Life. This book was super disorganized. Like a quarter of it was just a rehashing of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, which I had already read. So that was weird. Not a lot of it had anything to do with actually finding your Ikigai or even explaining what the concept of Ikigai is. The author talks about his travels in Okinawa quite a bit, which I thought was interesting. He talked about how this village in Okinawa has people who live really long, which was cool, but I didn't really see how it made sense with the title of the book. I mean, finding your life's purpose, maybe it does, I don't know, but I don't think finding your life's purpose really has too much to do with how long you live. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. Maybe that was the point. But if it was the point that finding your life's purpose makes you live longer, then they didn't do a very good job of explaining it. The next book was Oil and Marble by Stephanie Story, and I'm so proud of myself. I finally finished this book. I started this book in 2019, but I loved it. I don't know why it took me so long to finish. I really loved it. It's about Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci living in Florence at the same time. Maybe the problem was that the first half of the book wasn't my thing, but the second half of the book, which I read just now, was about Michelangelo working on his famous David statue. And I really loved it. It also talks about Leonardo da Vinci working on Mona Lisa, and it was such a really creative novel about art, which I love, so I really highly recommend this. The second to last book in this wrap-up is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. First of all, can we talk about this author's name? It's an awesome name, okay? I picked this up because it was on the Goodreads Best of 2020 nominees list for science, and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars only because a good portion of it kind of went over my head. I took biology in high school, but that's the extent of my knowledge of it, so I wish that it had been written in a way that allowed me to really understand everything very well. But I learned so much about fungi from this book. It was so interesting, and you could tell the author's enthusiasm and passion for the subject, which I absolutely love. So I highly recommend this book. Alright guys, woo, that is it for this long November wrap-up video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you want to read any of these books, or what was on your November reading list this year. I would really love to talk to you about it. And I read so much this month. I went a little bit overboard, I think. I was just so excited with all these readathons, but in December I only have the reindeer readathon going on, so I think I'm going to take it a little bit slower. Just relax. Don't have to read so much. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you want more videos like this. See you next time!